listening to The Writing Life, interviewing real writers about making a living from their words.
Hi, we are The Writing Life, and I'm here with Kitty.
Hi.
And today we are with Gary Boswell, who was the youngest living poet featured in the BBC Nation's Favourite Comic Poems anthology. Hi Gary, thank you very much for this. One of your last books published was in collaboration with the painter Hideyuki Sobue, and he's Japanese from a very different culture. Do you think that enriches your common projects?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I've always been one of those people who looks at the world from an internationalist point of view, really. I grew up in that, in Birmingham in the 1960s and 70s when there was a big immigration thing going on within the UK. So I grew up with like West Indians and Asian kids in my classroom, which brought about all those issues of racism which happened in that time. And, you know, I was in the forefront of it as a child and grew up with it and never, therefore, had a sort of logical reason to question differences in culture or colour of skin or any of those things, because that was happening in front of me as a natural thing, you know. So, but that's not true of my family, you know, and in the town I was living in where the immigration thing happened, you know. So I've got both sides of it. I've had kind of racism on the one side, of which I was also indoctrinated a little bit, as you do as you grow up. But I've also had a beautiful opportunity to be amongst a multicultural society right from the very beginning, really. And so I've always grown up with that as a totally natural thing. So when you have a Japanese artist coming along and saying, hey, like your poems, want to work together, and, you know, it's not an issue, it's not a question at all. He's just another nice guy, a mate, basically. And that's how it is. But I also love that thing about language from all around the world, you know, the global family, as they talk about it politically. And that's always, for me, just been a natural thing that people from different cultures or different ideas has just always been part of everyday life, and that's what I like about universities as well, and, you know, where that sort of thing, and Britain as in general is a good country for that. And so yeah, it's not been an issue at all. It's an enrichment, you know. It's kind of natural enrichment. Really enjoy doing it. I mean, as well as the fact that he's a good painter as well, which helps.
So what are the benefits of working with another artist from another discipline?
I'm a multi-artist myself, I suppose. My university degree, which happened at Lancaster University, although it wasn't actually on this site where we are now, was an integrated art. I was an integrated arts student, so I was encouraged right from the very beginning to be involved in all the art forms. So that's dance and drama, visual arts, music, and creative writing. Creative writing being the only one I thought I could actually do until I got there, you know, and so I was in part of that family again, and part of that sort of global family of all the disciplines, and encouraged by both the university and by the staff to get involved in everything, to explore what I could do, so I painted and I took photographs and I performed and I did musical projects and danced even. I even danced and still like to dance and things, not as a professional, and yeah, so that's always been a very much a part of my thing. But, you know, when it comes down to what's your specialism, what you do professionally or what you're really good at or whatever, that's always been creative writing really first and foremost, and poetry in particular, I suppose, but writing in general. Because the only one I think I can confidently put my hand up and say, yeah, I'm okay at that. I'm not too bad, you know. Whereas all the others are just, you know, things I dabble in. But working then with other specialists from those areas is just, you know, the respect thing is there really. We've got that respect for each other, and that different way of communicating in languages is really exciting. I think I've always liked that. I like working with dancers in particular, and that's the thing I've done a few times, you know, and don't get much chance to do these days since I semi-retired, but I did a lot of poetry dance projects in my heyday, and they were great, you know. But you never knew what was going to happen, you know. That's the beauty of it, really, the multidiscipline thing. That because you're working outside of your own comfort zone, and you've got somebody with you there who's got that comfort zone to work from, you know. It just makes the whole thing extremely exciting. I like the unknown. That's always been my approach to writing as well. I never have a plan, you know, before I start. I don't know what I'm going to write about, and it comes out in the process. And I've stayed with that for 50 years now, basically. So that's obviously how it is for me. You know, I've had novelists tell me, like, if you're going to write a novel, you've got to work a plan out. You know, you can't just launch into it. I write my novels without knowing what's going to happen, basically.
Well, you've obviously had a very varied background, and I know you've also been a poet in residence several times. Could you tell us a bit more about the communities you worked with there and how you got involved in that? Yeah,
and how that doesn't happen so much now, really. I mean, the world changed. There were two big things that happened in my lifetime and during my career, I guess. The one being the national curriculum, which was introduced to the UK, because I did a lot of things in education. But the introduction of the national curriculum killed a lot of the opportunities off. And the other thing being the Labour government was in power for much of my career as well, and arts funding therefore was healthy, and hasn't been so really for the last, well, I don't know how many years now, but for quite a long time. And so those kind of projects are not really there so much now for the young poets coming up now. When I was in my 20s, just out of university, there were hundreds of them. So I'm not the only one at all. You know, the only poet in residence in the UK. There are lots of us from that era who did those projects and worked in all sorts of settings. I worked in old people's homes and prisons and hospitals and schools and anywhere where people meet, really. And there would always be funding for the project so that the poet was getting paid, you know, and I was lucky in that respect. I guess I lived at that time, because if you're graduating now and you want to do that kind of work, then it's harder and the funding is far less. But that's about to change, maybe. Who knows? The current political change that's happening in the country. Is there a change? I don't know whether there is or not, but there's certainly some opportunity for that to come back. And so, yeah, for me, politics is always there anyway, and poetry politics is definitely always there. But if you want to do that sort of thing, and if you want to see that sort of thing happening, you have to vote Labour. You can't vote Tory. It's as simple as that, really.
And you were also the youngest living poet featured in the BBC, as we said in our introduction. But did you always know you wanted to be an author?
From when? From birth? No, it was a late thing for me, really. It never happened at school. I mean, I did poetry at school. I did Coleridge and Shakespeare and things in English literature at school, and hated it. As a phrase that you used when we first met, was desperately dull. That's a perfect description of what I thought of poetry in those days at school. So I came out of school as a 16-year-old and worked in a bank for 4 years,
wow.
that was my sort of way of just getting out of school, basically. I didn't know what I was going to do, but anything to get me out of school, that was how I was. And I was a smoker as well, so I was very unpopular within school, because if you smoked in my day again at school, you were not popular, and more so than now, really. I mean, obviously the world has changed again on issues like that, but anyway, I was quick, just keen to get out of school, and therefore no idea of being a writer at the age of 16. And what happened to introduce me to writing and to poetry, I suppose. I find it hard to pinpoint exactly the moment, but punk rock basically was the thing. I got into a punk rock band as a drummer, which upset the bank as well, and so those things were going on. The Sex Pistols were around. But still, poetry hadn't happened at that point. It was more music, and I was in a punk rock band, and I played the drums because that's the only option open to me. I can't play a musical instrument, and I'm tone deaf musically, so the drums was the only option. I played the drums without really having any knowledge about what that entailed or whatever. I just did it. That's what you did in punk rock. But then, of course, lyrics came up as well, and song lyrics was the first introduction to the possibility of poetry, I think. But it really happened, in terms of me wanting to be a writer, a bit later than that. I'd been in the band maybe a couple of years. And I borrowed a book from the library called The Ape Man Cometh, and I remember this, of course, so this has got to be a moment when it's important. And I borrowed it thinking it was a joke book, a funny book, and it was. I laughed all the way through it. And then I read on the back cover, after I'd finished reading it, that it was a poetry book. It was written by Adrian Mitchell, and all the things in it were poems. And I thought, crikey, is that the desperately dull stuff I didn't like at school then? Because it hadn't seemed like that at all. So that was the first inclination that there was something to poetry that may actually work for me. And then at the same time, punk rock again, and we went to see a guy called John Cooper Clarke, who was big and still is. He's come back again now. The godfather of punk poetry, basically, who I saw him at Barbarella's in Birmingham performing. Again, thinking he was a band. I didn't know he was a poet, and things. Just thought he was a band, and I had my mind blown that night by his delivery and his performance, and his lexicon of words, I suppose, was mind blowing, really. And just to see him on stage with it live, that was my inspiration to think, hey, I wouldn't mind going to this, And so from then on, I started trying, wrote a few lyrics for the band. And that's where poetry came from, really. The next thing that happened was at Lancaster University. At that time, we're promoting a degree for people who were in jobs like the bank. If you want to come and do creative arts and an integrated arts degree, come to Crewe and Alsager College, and do it. And I just saw the advert and followed that because I wasn't wildly happy in the bank. Although the bank had sent me on a course to keep me in education, really, even though I was working full-time. They sent me for what they called a one-day release course, and I don't know if these still exist, but that's what I did for 1 day a week. But it was a business degree that I had to do, and so for a while I was quite into that. And there was an English and writing element of that degree. So I've got it's an A-level equivalent basically in that. And I was going on to the Institute of Bankers degree status when it suddenly occurred to me that I didn't really want to write about economics or statistics as they wanted me to. Like, I actually wanted to write Monty Python scripts or poetry, and things. And that's just when it came from there, really. And then this advert saying there's a degree you can go for. And my family, and that's the bit that comes next, really. My family then hear that I'm thinking of giving up the job in the bank and going back to college to do a degree in integrated arts, and the family just go, and the bank starts to go, what? You're giving up a successful career as a banker, and you're going to go and be a dropout student and all that business, and I think that's what I might do, but they all said, you must be crazy, or you don't do that, you're giving up work and job and security and money and going out on a limb, and you won't do that, will you? Because you've got a good career ahead of you. And I just thought about it. I think probably the swing. I don't know where I got the courage from, but it was a courageous act, undoubtedly. But I just packed everything in and went to college. And where did that come from? I was bullied a bit in the last place I worked from in the bank. That probably helped. I think a guy was bullying me, which I didn't understand that it was bullying at the time. But looking back, I know it was pretty. And I started writing poems about him. Great thing about poetry.
The ultimate revenge.
Yeah, that's the great thing about being a poet. You can write about anything, and you can use them for any purpose, and they're very powerful if you write them well. That's
definitely.
So, and he, I knew I'd done something when he sort of stormed in one day and said, "What the hell's it?" Slamming the phone down. I'd circulated around the office that I was working in, and they'd laughed, or whatever, and he'd come in very offended, so I knew I'd done two things quite successfully there. I'd both entertained the audience and offended them at the same time, and that was my first experience, I suppose, of what writing can do and what you can do as a writer, the power you have, really. And then performance, because I say John Cooper Clarke thing, and performance poetry was kind of occurring to me at the same time, and I saw the power of that as well. So, and then I was off from then on. Then I got to college and met other people who were doing it, and got on stage with punk poets who were doing it, and started performing on a regular basis, and just thought, this is it. This is the rest of my life, I guess, really. And although that's not quite how it's gone, I've stuck with it nevertheless. And that question comes up in a minute, I know, doesn't it? I mean, why are you a poet? I think I've answered that many times over my career, and I change the answer depending on who's asking and how I feel about it at the time and the mood I'm in. But my version of that now is that I don't really have a choice. Poetry chose me. I didn't choose it. I didn't know anything about it, and I didn't choose it particularly. It chose me for some reason, and said, this is what you're going to write. This is what you can do well, and this is what you like seeing, and this is what you should do with the rest of your life. And I've tried to give that up a few times since, in the years since, as a parent and as a responsible member of society and all those sort of things, but I've never been able to give it up. It won't go away.
I mean, you don't only write poems, you also write short stories, novels. Yeah,
that was the training, again, I got at Crewe and Alsager College, the degree that I went on, which was an integrated arts degree, but I was majoring in creative writing. So, I did photography and dance and all those sort of things as well, but, the intense bit that I did was a creative writing education, as well as an encouraging me to write aspect, which was unique to that one, probably unique to all creative writing degrees, yeah. But in those days, again, because it was a revolutionary sort of thing, and then it had opponents, from within society and the university complex who thought it was a bad idea and things, but the guys who were doing it, who were teaching it, and the professors we worked with were all very, very active and very intense as well about encouraging you to get stuck in big time, and so but it was all the disciplines of creative writing, not just poetry. It was, I did journalism a fair bit as well, and just through the 3 years that I was there, I probably did a lot. The novel come up and the short story, which I did embrace, and the novel I've tried on and off over the years, and playwriting in particular, that one I'm still trying to conquer. But yeah, I've tried them all, that sort of thing. And I write advertising copy and music lyrics, and I write whatever, shopping lists, and I can write. I found that out. I'm that kind of writer as well, I suppose, which sort of helps from my point of view, that I can turn my hand to whatever. I'm perhaps a jack of all trades, master of none type of thing, but that's how I am. So I've always sort of, the writing things there, but it, as I say, won't go away either.
Speaking of being a jack of all trades, many writers find it a great challenge to read their own work out in public, but that seems to be a great strength and also a great joy of yours, performing the work you write. Could you give our listeners any tips? Or I
think I can, yeah, because I don't ever think about it, and I've never had to learn it. That's the one thing that I suppose has come most naturally of all. And even things like this, talking in an interview and things. Just I'm a chatty person, I guess. Although I'm not a chatty social person, I suppose. It's when it comes to things like work and writing and things that I'm passionate about or whatever, I get incessantly chatty. And that's what my performance thing's always been about as well. And I don't know if I've said this on here, or I will always say that if you come to one of my poetry readings, don't necessarily expect to hear that much poetry, because if I get off on something else, I'll talk about that, and providing you're prepared to listen, and not giving me the yawn sign that it's time to shut up and move on. I'll talk about whatever. And I do like to improvise and go with the flow. I'll always just like talking to people. As I say, providing they're prepared to listen, and an audience generally comes with that expectation anyway, they're going to listen, so that you would just approach it like that. And if you've got poems that don't work particularly well in performance or when they're read out, don't read those. That's my tip, I think, more than anything, because obviously not all poems are designed for that performance thing, really. And I've got the one that's in the national, nation's favourite comic poems book is one I don't read out. I don't perform that generally. I have done, and I learned it didn't go down very well, So and yet it was going down really well when I sent it out, really, to editors and to anthologies, and finding that was how it needed to be shared, as a poem for the page, basically, is what they call it. And I never thought it was going to be that when I wrote it, and it's one of those things again you find out by sharing it. That's another of the great beauties of being a poet and being a writer generally for me is that. And poetry is really good at that, I think, is you get different responses from different people, but you learn there's a universal response as well, and that's kind of colours how you go on from there, and that's why if you find performing in public challenging, or you're a bit shy about it, or you don't think you've got the voice for it or whatever, you've got to do it anyway, I think, is what you just got to steel yourself to do it and find your way of doing it. And finding your way, and I've done a fair bit of work in that in the residencies I've done over the years. One of the big things I would promote, is just that if you've written something and I'm saying it's good and you think it's good, okay, so we go and share it with the audience, and we find our ways to do that. And the easiest and the best way is just to read it to a group of people. And the more variety there is in the people that you read it to, the more feedback that you're going to get, the more you're going to know about that piece, basically. So you get to know your own work. But the other thing about Duckstone Shop in Sainsbury's, which is that poem that's in the one they vote for, whenever I get onto the X Factor of poetry, and they just know it, and I'm thinking, what do you know about it? And they tell me what they know about it, and I don't know that, and I wrote the damn thing, but that's how it's been. It's been a long time ago when I wrote it, and it really isn't mine anymore. I think that's the thing about it. 26 years since I wrote it. It's had a life of its own for a long time now, and so therefore I'm still sort of learning. It's a bit like having your kids, and your kids have a voice, and they develop their own personalities, and eventually they become nothing to do with you at all. They're their own individual, and it's like that with that poem. It's got a life of its own now, and it's always fascinating me. But other people love to read that out to audiences. It comes up in speech drama classes and things like that, and I go to watch them, and I'm thinking, I shall learn something about how you deliver this poem, because I've never been able to deliver it. So. And that's, I'm still working on that, having said that, because I still find the best way for me to share that poem is just to hand it out and let people read it. It seems to work best that way. But a lot of the audience don't agree with me on that, so, that's the point, isn't it, really? We all got our own feelings with that. I've met people, who feel that poem is theirs, and they get annoyed when I won't read it out, or they'll request it, and I'm saying, well, I'm not keen. It doesn't work when I do it, but you can do it. We'll listen to you do it. So that's just how it is for me, and that's again how I like it to be as well.
Sharing your work is obviously a very sociable experience for you, but when you're actually writing the poem, does it tend to be a more solitary affair, or is it about engaging with people and bouncing off them? Yeah, no,
it's a solitary thing, as it is, I think, for most writers, isn't it, really? I mean, I've written in pairs occasionally, and with co-writers, on a couple of occasions, not mightily successfully, I hasten to add there, because I like doing it, but it's hard, I think, and you really have to find somebody with whom you really click. And that hasn't happened to me, really, in my career, not in any big way anyway. I've had one or two times when I think it was about to, or it might be, but it doesn't quite gone through, because ultimately there is that thing about the solitary nature of writing, and I'm particularly like that, I suppose, as well, in that, I'm an awkward sod, I do like things to be how I want them to be. I did a sad tale to tell in many ways, but a public art project in Barrow in Furness where we were writing together in that, and I'd been the writer in residence in the town for 2 years at that point, so I knew loads of the writers, and two of us were commissioned to do this public art piece, and so we wrote it together, but that was where that really came home to me, that because we then came to a point where we disagreed about something and we couldn't sort it, it was a real problem. There was a project coordinator and a director as well whose job was to sort the problem out between the two writers, but that never really happened either, because writers really, when they get like that, and I could be, I'm like that too. I wanted it to be how I wanted it to be, but my co-writer had the complete opposite, and so it just came to that impasse. So yeah, for me, I kind of learned a lot from that. It was only about 20 years ago, sort of thing, but it had a big impact on me at that time, and it was partly why I started to wind things down a bit, because it did depress me as well that I hadn't been able to get past that point with that co-writer, where. But ultimately, again, for me, the art thing spoke. It's not about people, actually. Ultimately, for me, it is about art. It is about the art. Ultimately, that's the thing that matters. And so the solitary thing is, it's ingrained in me. And as I say, I think it is in most writers. It's how we work best. But I like to get into that arena to share it, because that's the whole purpose of the exercise. Yeah.
I think writers are encouraged increasingly to mix their personal and professional life on social media platforms, but you're saying that the key to your success has been perhaps to keep them very separate. What's your opinion on social media?
That's a modern question as well. I saw that on the list, and I because in your list of questions that you sent me, it was sort of connected to promoting yourself as well, and I've done loads of that. So obviously I would imagine that, because I don't use social media, well, the few times I've tried to use it, it's been a disaster, so I've steered clear from it and things, but I'm not wild about it, but I probably haven't got the hang of it. It's probably a generational thing, I would have thought. But I did loads of promoting myself as a writer, so I suppose if you're into social media and you're good at it and you enjoy it, then it's going to be fantastic for that, I would have thought. It's just going to make it easy to get people to be aware of what you're doing, really. But I wasn't in the generation for that. I don't know what we would have done in our generation if we'd have had that. If we'd have had Twitter and Facebook. We had ganja and marijuana instead, I think, in my time, and so that was we were working at a different pace. It was a much more laid back thing. When I got to college and discovered the fact that people took drugs, which I didn't know about till I got there, because I've been a banker. I've been in a punk rock band as well, but we were clean as well. We never knew about drugs either. And I got to college and found out about drugs, and then thought, crikey, where have I been for the last? So I was at a college with a lot of laid back people, basically, because that's how it was then. And as I say, if they'd have had Twitter, I think they'd have probably had nervous breakdowns with it, and things like that. They couldn't have coped, the pace that everything moves at now. That's a different world we've moved into. Yeah, that's an interesting thing for me to write about in a way. I haven't done it yet. Is kind of if my life had been in reverse, and sort of the really important thing that's happened to me as a writer in the last sort of since that midlife crisis in the last 20 years, when I consciously sort of wound down being a full-time performer and poet, really, as well, working in the community. I then moved into being a freelance writer, which I hadn't really done much of in that 20 years before, because I was too busy, encouraging other people, performing and that kind of thing. So also I became more of a writer at that point when I became part-time and was taxi driving as well. And then the internet and email comes along at that same time, really, the same point. So all of a sudden I'm finding that as a journalist I can work from home, and I don't have to phone my copy in anymore. I can email it. Email was revolutionary to all of us from that generation again, who sort of remember what it was like before, and to have this incredible ability to get your writing out there immediately, astonishingly immediately, anywhere as well around the world, and that. It was just a real gateway opening up thing, and the internet likewise, because for research and and the stuff you could. It took ages sometimes to learn about something to write about, and now it's all at your fingertips, and so the speed you can do things at is just you don't know you're born if you haven't seen the world that I had before, but. Also, we have that, as most older people do. We have that nostalgia for the old days and how it used to be as well, because it's also quick now. And we used to be so laid back, and it was, you could think about it more, and maybe the quality was better in them days and things. That how true that is, I don't know, but that's just a feeling, really. But yeah, it's incredible how the life of the writer has changed really in the last 20 years, and the opportunities that are now available to you. Are they just different though? Yeah, that's probably what it is. They're just different. It's not that they're any better or worse. They're just different, I think. But. experiences with Facebook where, you know, I'll go on and have a look, see what they're saying. I've got an account, so, you know, I'll go and see what they're saying, remember what's on there. And then there's, I mean, reams of it, and it takes me all day to go through it all. And I'm one of those people who reads it all again, I suppose, so I just do nothing else, you know. So no writing gets done that day, you know. And then because you want to answer to all of it as well, because it's a writing activity, isn't it? I mean, Facebook is a writing activity, and Twitter likewise. So that's it. I guess you can do your career through them now. You don't really need to do anything else. You know, maybe you don't need a publisher anymore. And that was something I wanted to say about the tips. You know, one of my big tips really that I've learned, and I've only learned these really in the last 20 years as well, is when you get an editor, get one is the first tip, and then once you've got one, hang on to them, don't lose them. And then publisher is the same, obviously, but the publisher one's always been there, and that's always been the same. And editor is actually more important in my view, and get somebody, you know, who's editing your work. And when I teach now, I don't do a lot of teaching, but when I teach creative writing now, that's the big thing I push now, that because I understand it, having gone through it myself now, is that, you know, get yourself an editor, be each other's editors as well. You know, if you're in a community of writers, edit for each other, and because you might be the person. It's a bit like marriage, you know. Finding your editors is a bit like marriage. It's finding that person who is the right person to do it. Like I say, I was lucky enough to do that a few years ago, and the guy who's my editor is 24. You know, he's not my generation. He comes from a different world altogether. He was actually doing a job, you know, he commissioned me, and that's how we got to know each other. And then he liked what I did, and I liked the way he was editing my work, you know, and it's just gone from there, really. And so if you get somebody who really gets into your own work, that is the most invaluable thing that could ever happen for a writer. And I got that. And he's just rung me, I mean, I come now at a time when he's just got me a new publishing opportunity as well. I'm not seeing him for a while. He lives in Malta now as well. He moved away and things and got a new job. We kept in touch, and he's just been back in touch because he's seen a new opportunity and thought it might suit me. He got in touch, you know, and put me onto it, and I followed it. And
So thank you very much for all
My
your
pleasure.
tips, for all your experiences and stories. I think our listeners are going to find this interview really inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Yeah, it's been really fun to talk to you.
So now, Gary, if you would read one of your poems to us, that'd be fantastic.
It's been written in Scotland. It's been written as best as I can with a Scottish sort of dialect aspect to it, come out naturally anyway, because I was in Scotland at the time and I pick it up. But then it comes to the point of me performing it, and I'm not the greatest actor in the world, so my Scottish accent, when I'm very inconsistent with it, so it'll go in and out of English and Scottish basically. But it's a comic poem, at least, you know, in part, so I think I get away with doing it in Scottish, so long as you're prepared to laugh, you know, my accent. And so that's how I'm going to do it. I've tried it in English. I think I think Ines was there when I tried it in English, and it didn't work really, so I've gone back to the Scottish, but I'm still trying. I'm still working, and maybe I'll do it in both when I finally get the how to read it. So that's what's going on, more than the how to write it, which I think, as I said, was a burst, and it did get pretty much written all in one go. It's the how to perform it now and how to read it. So here it is, my attempt at it, as it is at the moment. It's called The Battle of the Trousers. I got done in on Dunoon. It was where the Battle of the Trousers took place. 7 rude women assailed me and shouted fell names to my face. They beat me with broom handles and byre, and forced me to wear the Scotch kilt. By exposing the noblest of nobbly knees, they humiliated me up to the hilt. The powerful girls from Glasgow, they were 60s, 60s liberated, played dominoes in Dunoon Old Men's Club, and refused to be dominated. The trousers were more than a symbol. They actually wanted to wear them. So when they were stripped from my vulnerable legs, there was no sense that any would share them. 'Twas all-out war to be owner. The battle of the trousers begun. Attention to me was diminished, as the dirty linen in public bedone. The violence throughout was quite vicious, punching, eye-gouging and kicking. Not long before the atomic attack and the nuclear broom handle was ticking. To think that I used to admire them, with their swagger and humour and hips, their bosoms to nurture the needy, and the strength in their hearts, not their lips. But someone somewhere pointed out 'twas a man's world, and that wasn't fair. The trousers would have to be fought for, and for peace in the world no more care. And you have to say, they fought fabulously, and the trousers, when won, fitted fine. I stood there in my draughty old kilt, and hung the washed dirty linen carefully up on the line.
You have been listening to to the Writing Live. Now we want to thank to Teresa, our editor, and Yvonne, the creator of the show.